Today we visit one of the most diverse arboretums in the world and speak to a lifelong expert on what we need to know to grow and care for conifers. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned as we garden smart in Georgia.
Bring the outdoors into your everyday life. Bass Pro Shops can outfit all your adventures, even those in your backyard. Bass Pro Shops, your adventure starts here.
A preformed hedge unit with 4 plants grown together, ready to plant. Instant Hedge, designed to create a finished look after installation.
The Jaguar F-Pace.
The Cox Arboretum and Gardens is a private estate located in Canton, Georgia in the foothills of the Piedmont Range. Numbering over 4,000 living specimens, the plantings display one of the largest private collections of temperate flora in the U.S. With an elevation of 1,200 feet and containing several lakes and streams, they're able to grow a wide variety of plants. The property is also bounded by several large wetland habitats where many migratory and native fowl make their home. It's situated on 13 acres in the middle of an old-growth southern deciduous hardwood forest. Tom Cox started his arboretum as a blank slate and simply began hand-clearing the site and installing plants that excited him. With no clear design or vision for what it was to become, he was simply guided by his passion for unusual plants. Today we'll walk the grounds of Cox Arboretum and learn from Tom what it takes to have success with conifers in our gardens at home. Tom, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for joining us here at Cox Arboretum. We're delighted to have you.
Well, Cox Arboretum is a beautiful place, and it is a snapshot of your vision and your passion for plants. Today we're talking about conifers, and you have one of the most impressive collections of species in the world on conifers, and I know that that's something that you've been very passionate about, among other things like woody ornamentals, shrubs, etc. But let's talk about conifers. Tell me about your collection and basically what your vision for collecting conifers has been here.
Yeah, I think to understand that better, let me start in the beginning. We started collecting conifers just for evergreen interest. I don't think I really thought about the subtlety of it being a conifer. It was more of a plant that was green in the winter. We started collecting hollies and rhododendrons, and conifers were one of the mix. Then over time I began to study them and become fascinated with this group. They're ancient plants. They were around long before modern flowering plants ever came on earth. So their lineages was very, very exciting and interesting to me. Over time we began to plant them. Sort of the dogma in the beginning was conifers won't live in the South. Conifers are the domain of Washington, Oregon, British Columbia,
Right.
Maine, Michigan, etc. And so we were told you couldn't grow them down here. We were the first private garden in the South to embrace conifers. There was only 2 other places besides us that were doing anything. J.C. Ralston Arboretum in Raleigh, the Atlanta Botanical Garden, Ron Dieterman at Atlanta Botanical Garden. And that was it. So we started playing with them. We failed a lot, but as like I said, when you fall on your face, you're moving forward.
Right.
And we learned a lot, and it was subsequently led to a book on conifers focused for the southeastern folks. There'd never been a writer from the Southeast ever wrote a sentence on conifers before. Today, over time, we have amassed what now is considered by the experts out there the largest species collection of conifers anywhere in North America.
Wow.
So amazing collection all the way from places like Vietnam and Mexico, all over Europe, a lot from China. If you look latitudinally where we sit here in Atlanta versus where areas like Yunnan, Hunan, Sichuan, Taiwan, they're right at home here.
And that's what makes a site like this ideal for this massive conifer collection, right?
It does, and you know, by illustration, I just look over my left shoulder here, and you'll see a large mature conifer collection. And we just started sticking conifers. What we learned is conifers love slope because they love drainage.
Right. Okay.
And so it allowed us to have, as you can see, great winter interest here with the colors, forms, textures. You can't achieve that with any other plant group.
Well, it's a beautiful collection. I know you've got a lot of plants to show us. Let's take a look at the garden.
Okay, sounds good.
Tom, before we dive into a discussion of many of the cultivars that you have here, I'd like to talk about the role of conifers in the garden and the way that home gardeners should look at that whole category of plants and all the many amazing uses for conifers in the garden.
Not everybody has the land we've got here.
Sure.
So over here behind me is an example of some dwarf conifers that people could use on smaller landscapes. And conifers have many uses. You know, we use them for screening here, for tall screening. We use them as weeping accent plants. We even use them in the house. People don't realize this, but conifers make great house plants.
Wow.
They're far more durable than many of the plants. But here you'll see various colors. Again, winter interest. There's no plant group that will give you the same colors, textures, forms that conifers can achieve. We use them in containers. They're great container plant, great filler plant around water, rocks. There's something about rock and conifers that just go together.
Absolutely. The way that we experience conifers in the wild, in most cases, they are these really, really large trees. But the reality of the matter is there's so many, almost any form you could imagine, in almost any application of the garden, you have dwarf, dense varieties, ones that are, you know, creeping, ones that are, you know, weeping. And it's true that even if you had just a small patio and you only had space for a few containers, or even small gardens, there are hundreds and hundreds of selections. You just have to seek them out. In many cases, they're not going to be available everywhere, but if you seek them out, especially from specialty nurseries, there's just a world of opportunity out there.
There is, especially with rare mail order nurseries who do a great job with these little dwarfs. They're not mass market plants, but they're great for filler. Also, another area I didn't talk about was upright, narrow plants that can fit a little niche. Plants like junipers. You know, juniper, where we garden down here, gets a bad name. They're overutilized and they're not the best forms. But if you'll notice, out here we have a real tall weeping juniper from the Himalayas. So wherever you go in the garden, there's plants for shade, there's plants for full sun, there's plants for wet. They're just so versatile.
Right. I mean, they're very versatile plants. They're beautiful, and also they add structure and definition to the garden. Tom, there are so many wonderful conifers in your collection, but I'm sure over the years there are certain ones that you've really grown a deep attachment to, and perhaps they've emerged as your favorites. What are some of the ones that you might identify that way?
There's a couple that I want to point out. The first one is from what was called formerly Soviet Georgia. It's Oriental spruce, Picea orientalis, Picea being spruce. And the one we're looking at here is, as you can see, very tall, very stately, nice dark green color. And when I think about favorites, the first thing I think about is adaptability.
Sure.
It can't be a favorite if it doesn't perform here. The next one I want to talk about is a special plant to me. It came from the Morris Arboretum in Pennsylvania, for the University of Pennsylvania. It's called a Taiwan cedar, or a coffin tree. They also use it for coffins for very rich people in Taiwan. And as you'll notice on that tree, It's got very pendulous needles. You'll see how they glisten in the sun. Much different color than the dark green of the Oriental spruce. I like the height to width ratio of it. I like the story behind it. This one was wild collected on Mount Morrison, highest mountain in Taiwan. Some others that we have, long needle form of Cephalotaxis lanceolata. Very long, wispy needles on it, almost like a palm. That would be from China. Another one would be a Mexican pine, Pinus patula. That comes from the high elevation mountains in Mexico where it snows a lot, and you'll notice how reflex the needles are on that pine. For snow load, it's adapted to the high elevation. The next one would be a golden form of the Oriental spruce, the one from Soviet Georgia, or formerly Soviet Georgia, that's called Skylands, and it was actually found in Skylands Park in New Jersey. So those would be a sampling of my favorites. If we had the time, we could talk about many more, but that's a good start.
Tom, a meaningful part of your collection are these super rare and endangered species, and part of the purpose of the Arboretum is to preserve these genetics for future generations as plants are becoming endangered at an alarming rate. And a lot of the efforts that you've put into the Cox Arboretum is finding these plants where there are only very few of them that remain, and bringing them back here and nurturing them so that future generations may be able to enjoy them. I'd like for you to talk about a few of the ones that are particularly special that you've had a hand in bringing back.
Okay, the first one is really one that has quite a story to it. There is a fir. There's only 3 left in the wild on one mountain in China. I knew of the plant. It's the rarest conifer on earth, Bechuan zulensis. But we acquired this plant actually from cuttings that were supplied from a benefactor from overseas. We brought the plant back and sent the cuttings to Conifer Kingdom, a gentleman by the name of Brent who was kind enough to graft these for us. So we're proud to have 2 of these plants in the collection. And as you can see, it's quite a nice plant. That's got a future, I believe, here. Right. The next plant is a plant that I feel confident in saying that we have the only copy of this plant anywhere in North America. Wow. It's an ABs called ABs Fanchuangensis, a mouthful I know, but Fanchuangensis is a plant that the Chinese really in the beginning, I don't believe, wanted out of the country. It's so rare, it just has not appeared anywhere in North America. The next plant is a plant from China called Torreya Jackie. I've only seen this plant in one other place in Hungary at an institute there, but Torreya Jackie is a very long needle for the genus, and you don't see it, I think, again.
Sure.
The next one is Glyptostrobus, one of the 5 deciduous conifers, and Glyptostrobus again comes from China, probably Vietnam in that sector.
Well, Tom, it's such a rare treat to see these unusual plants, and you know, of course, they're plants that for a horticulturalist like myself, I would have no other opportunity to see them, and so it's really, really special that they've been preserved here, and it really underscores the important work that you're doing here at Cox Arboretum. And of course, there are tons of rare and unusual plants here, but one thing I'd like to focus on as well is all these unusual forms, and these are typically cultivars, so it would be, you know, a certain seedling that was selected for specific traits that are particularly interesting for the gardener. I'd like for you to talk us through some of those that you think are particularly special.
We've collected a lot of those plants here that are just genetic mutations, weeping and all kind of contorted forms. The first one I will talk about is a plant from the Himalayas. It's a Himalayan pine, Pinus wallichiana, and the cultivar is called zebrina, as in zebra, so named because it has banding on each of the needles. I first saw this plant up in the Ralston Arboretum and was blown away with it. The next one is a plant from Connecticut found. It was a seedling of a witch's broom named Shaggy Dog, which I thought was a pretty cool name, right. Shaggy Dog. Well, it looks like a shaggy dog. It's about 4 foot tall and wide and kind of just a low-growing mutated plant again.
Well, and a lot of dwarf plants, and especially in the world of conifers, they are the result of witch's brooms, right? Which is a kind of unusual mutation or structure, if you will, on a full-size tree that looks like a little basketball or witch's broom of foliage, right?
Yeah. Unlike mistletoe, which it resembles in some ways, if you've seen mistletoe is a parasite that's attached to the plant, where it's not part of the plant, where a witch's broom actually is a mutation of that plant, partly caused by an insect or maybe some virus that caused it to form this globose ball in many forms, and plant collectors love those.
Of course.
Perhaps my very favorite of the unusual conifers is a pine that's native to the Appalachian Mountains, called Pinus pungens or Table Mountain pine. It would just come into North Georgia, but in the winter this plant mutates into a school bus yellow color. We could stand 50 yards away and this plant would just glow and show out. So it's quite a plant. So those are some of the ones that, and we could be here all day talking about those as well.
Well, Tom, before we leave you, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about, for the home gardener, what kind of things should we keep in mind from a standpoint of making the right selection and making sure that we do what we can to select plants that are going to be most successful for us?
Well, I think it's easier today than it was for me in the beginning because of the internet and finding things that were more difficult back then, which was the incentive for me writing the book Landscaping with Conifers and Ginkgo, because we didn't have any reference. Today, I think some of the more useful comments would be how large the plant's going to get. What colors do you want to achieve? What's going to contrast well? What's going to not contrast so well? What's going to compete? Do I want something narrow? Do I want something globose? Do I want something that's going to spread low? So there's a lot of considerations when putting a garden in. You've also got to look at, is this plant going to perform here?
Right.
Have I got the wrong plant for the wrong location? Have I got the right sun exposure? And again, a little research. A gardener can find those things out today pretty easily. You got to consider, does it want water? Does it want drainage? I would say everything should start with your soil.
Sure.
Good preparation of the soil is basic gardening, whether you're doing conifers or red buds or what have you. Secondly is mulch, mulch, and more mulch. It's for a lot of reasons, particularly with conifers. You're keeping the soil cool, you're avoiding the soil splash coming up from the ground, causing environmental issues for the plants. We also have a mentality here, everything here is on skates. I say that from the context of if a plant gets too large, we can always move it. And we move things around. So it's not atypical in a winter for me to move plants. But think about size, they surprise you. Plants don't read books when it comes to size. They really don't. So that book that says 4 feet, depending on where that is, and we talk about zones. Zone 7 in Birmingham, Alabama is not the same Zone 7 as Portland, Oregon. A lot of it is trial and error. Don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to lose plants. You're going to grow unless you make mistakes. You're not going to grow.
Let's talk a little bit about maintenance. I know this is a really, really broad category, but what are some general guidelines, in the realm of pruning, nutrition, and then management of disease and insects when it comes to conifers?
The Russians have an old saying that too soon old, too late smart. And one of the things I've learned, particularly with things like ginkgo, is lime. Ginkgos really need a lot of lime, and most of the conifers coming out of Asia need a lot of lime. Lime in the fall, we fertilize in the spring. And aside from that, from an insect standpoint, we don't use a lot of insecticide here. We prune a lot. It's much different than it is pruning an azalea or a rhododendron or something. It's a very specific way you prune conifers. We get master gardeners all the time, how big is this going to get? Well, I say, how big do you want it to get?
Right.
Keep it any size you want.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, Tom, it's been such a pleasure spending the day with you and sharing your passion and your knowledge. This is such a special, wonderful place. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, and I'll just on the closing note point out that with the conifers, you can look at the forest around here and how lifeless it seems right now. Then draw your eyes in to the arboretum here and you can look, conifers abound, and how much alive that is.
Yeah.
And so for those wanting to create a four-season garden and to feel enlivened by the colors of winter, this is a wonderful place to do it.
Absolutely. Sure is. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Brent Marcus has made a name for himself in the world of conifers and maples. He started Rare Tree Nursery in 2007 at the age of 24 in Silverton, Oregon. Brent grows roughly 700 varieties of dwarf conifers, plus an assortment of Japanese maples, which he sells through Rare Tree Nursery in Conifer Kingdom. Today, Brent shares his knowledge and passion for plants with us as we continue our discussion on growing conifers. Brent, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Indeed. So you're an expert in conifers, and of course ornamental conifers are all across the U.S. We tend to think of, New England and the West Coast as being places they proliferate, but they can be grown everywhere. But there are certain considerations that we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about what is the right fir, spruce, pine, etc. for our garden. What suggestions could you give us?
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent question. So we ship plant material throughout the United States. Here we're standing in front of a beautiful assortment. It includes pine, spruce, fir, some false cypress, some junipers, some yews as well. Most of these plants would be just as home in the Midwest or New England as they are here in the Southeast. For gardens in the Southeast, there are a number of considerations. The first step in selecting any conifers for your garden would be to look at the hardiness, okay? If your plant is not hardy for your particular zone, you can cross it off right off the bat. Then you want to look at native range and where plants generally thrive. And you can look to your local botanic gardens. Universities have excellent lists of plants and varieties, as well as arboreta. Right here, we're looking at for example, an eastern white pine, shaggy dog, that has a beautiful range of hardiness from zone 3 through 7. Further up, this nice glistening blue is a variety of a Japanese white pine. And then also we have a Japanese red pine, this low green dwarf.
These are ones that perform well in Atlanta. I guess nearly all of them do well on the West Coast, right?
Yes, so the Pacific Northwest is certainly a hotbed. So, right. and that's why the nursery is located in the Northwest, just because we can grow them so beautifully with our mild climate. But for people further up north, you're really, first thing would be to consider hardiness. What hardiness zone are you? And you can just look that up using almost dozens of different sources online. And then that'll give you a general guideline for plant material that you can select. After that, how hot or humid of an area are you in?
Great. So some conifers, of course, they thrive in those environments. Others, of course, struggle. I want to talk about soil conditions some too, because I know that's very important for conifers. Some like to be grown on the edge of a mountain where there's great drainage, but others are wonderful in bogs or even nearly submerged.
Definitely. So some of the conifers that prefer wet sites would be bald cypress or dawn redwood. In addition, some pines like wet sites. Pinus virginiana, the Virginia pine, really likes moist sites. Other species in general, like firs in general, detest being wet. What you need to do is make sure that your soil is loose enough so that the roots can penetrate it. And so if you're in heavy clay soil, you really have to modify your soil for any of these conifers to thrive.
It's very important to look at what our soil conditions are, add a bunch of mulch or compost, and then a layer of mulch over the top too, just to lock the moisture in and also make sure there's plenty of air for the roots. Well, those are great tips, Brent. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Absolutely.
Each week we travel the country north to south, east to west, visiting some of the most exciting gardens, as well as talking to industry horticulturalists about design principles, new plants, and also how you can be most successful with your home gardens. We also love answering your gardening questions, so visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com.
outdoors into your everyday life. Bass Pro Shops can outfit all your adventures, even those in your backyard. Bass Pro Shops, your adventure starts here.
A preformed hedge unit with 4 plants grown together, ready to plant. Instant Hedge, designed to create a finished look after installation.
The Jaguar F-Pace.
Today we spent the day with Tom Cox and Brent and Marcus exploring the amazing world of growing and caring for conifers. If you have questions about anything you've seen today, you can visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, even if you're a master gardener, there's always more to learn. So join us next week for more great gardening tips and ideas as we garden smart.